So the next session essentially means and essentially concerns about the basics of cloud computing. So now what exactly is a cloud? Okay, so in order to answer this question, first of all, we need to consider a few types of environments. Okay, so the very first type of environment is a local environment. So over here, this laptop where a person can sit and code is called a local environment. So whenever you type anything on your machine and you save the code, you run the code, you look at the output, you are working in your local environment. Okay, and the users who are working on the local environment are called developers. Okay, so in this way, as a developer, you will always be working on a local environment. But whenever you want to build high quality products or whenever you want to build high quality solutions, that is when you also need a server in the picture. And we will be looking at why exactly do we need a server shortly. But over here, you need to send that code somewhere else where it is executed more properly. So in this case, that entire environment is called a remote environment. So this is where you send the code for execution and the code is executed, and this is how the end user interacts with your code. So your code lives on some server and then an end user makes request to that code and then generates an output. Okay, so let's look at this cycle by a real example. Okay, so first of all, we have some basics of networking. So now let's say I am a user and in my browser I type in google.com. Okay, so this is a query which I have created. Okay, so now I want google.com. So this is my requirement. So now this google.com is passed to something called as a domain name server. Okay, so this domain name servers are servers on the internet who actually contain a list of IP addresses. So exactly, there is no place on the internet called as google.com. But on the internet, there are places which are identified by your IP address. So essentially over here, if I want google.com, that is when I tell the domain name server that, okay, I want google.com. Then the domain name server gives me an IP address. So now this IP address is further passed on to the network, to the World Wide Web, and then from this IP address we come across a certain server. So in the case of google.com, this server might be located somewhere in the United States. So this is how we come up with the IP address of a server, and then essentially I am now talking directly to a server. So now I tell this server that I want google.com, and then I am also passing a query. So a query is some added information along with your particular website. So along with google.com, your query might be the search word which you are trying to perform. So let's say you want a search result which is about Google Cloud. So over here, instead of my query, you will be typing in Google Cloud. Okay, so after typing in Google Cloud, now the server knows that you want to work on something called Google Cloud. So now this server belongs to google.com, and now it wants to understand that you are working on something called as Google Cloud. So now this particular information is again given to the server. So now this server works on different key values given to it. So for example, your location, your IP address, your search history, your browsing history, and uses all of this to finally generate a response. So this response is essentially a set of search results, and these results are further given back to the user. Okay, so you can think of this entire system as a big restaurant. So you are a customer, you tell the waiter that I want this particular dish. So you don't specify the recipe or the ingredients or the process involved in creating that particular dish. So now the waiter takes some code word for that particular recipe and then passes it to the kitchen. So now this kitchen works on that particular recipe and then it generates some dish for you. So after generating this sort of dish, it further gives you the dish back to eat. So this is how the entire networking cycle actually works. Okay. Okay, so with this, now let's again go back to the local and remote working environment and let's understand what exactly is the necessity of two different environments. So first of all, on the local environment, you write some code and then this code is now given to a server. Okay, so over here, when you want to specify the interactions between the server and the waiter, in this case the domain name server, so this interaction is best done when this particular kitchen is completely optimized. So first of all, you write some code on your local environment, then you give it for a server, you give it to a server and then the code is executed on that server and then a user requests the code by these means and then finally that code is given to the user. Okay, so essentially this is how the entire software development cycle is basically created and used. So now ultimately the main part which we are concerned with is what exactly is the role of cloud in this entire software development cycle. Okay, so what exactly is present inside a cloud environment? So first of all, whenever you are inside a cloud environment, that is when you can perform three main types of applications. The first one is where you have web hosting. So if you have created a website and then the very first requirement of creating a web hosting platform is that it should be available. So over here, for a good restaurant, you may have an opening and a closing time, but on the internet, you cannot tell a customer to come at a specific time or a user to come at a specific time. So in 24 hours, you can get a request of getting a particular web page any time of any day. And especially when you have a global audience, that is when there is always day in some part of the world. So you can never stop a single person from coming to your website. So that is why a very first requirement of this particular approach is that it should always be on. So whichever computer or whichever server is used in this particular environment should always be on and listening to different requests. So you can also set up a laptop at your home and install a web server software on it, but the only condition is that it should be on 24/7. And even if it is down for 1 second, that is when you are also losing traffic. So this particular aspect is not possible at our home. That is why we use third-party solutions like different cloud providers. So Google also has their data centers in multiple different locations in multiple different countries. But essentially the main aspect over here is that they promise 99.99% uptime. And this basically means that whenever you have created a big website, that is when you can host it on Google Cloud so that it is redundant. Then again, a very important aspect of using a cloud as compared to a local environment is that it is redundant. So the first thing is, so let's say you have set up a local environment at your home and now you want to use it to host a website. And suddenly something happens and your laptop dies. So now you don't have anything different to again host your website on a similar hardware. But in the case of different cloud providers, they always have 4 or 5 different machines hosting your website. So if any one crashes, then immediately the others take up. So with that, we have web hosting. The second very important aspect is data storage and data warehousing. Okay, so you might have heard about different databases and how exactly are databases used in cloud. But essentially, whenever you are looking at data stored on cloud, that is when it is stored in some sort of objects. Okay, so currently I guess we all are engineering students and we have seen different objects like structures, class, and then different objects derived from those classes. So essentially all of the data which is present on a particular server is stored into some sort of object. So we define how this object will look, and we will also define something like this further in this bootcamp, where we will be using Firebase to create a lot of different databases and use those databases to get data, to work on that data. So essentially you can take user data and store it into some sort of data warehouse in the cloud. Then there are also a lot of different privacy concerns here, that you simply cannot store all the data that you want on the cloud, and you simply cannot use it as you want. So for example, Facebook was recently in a lot of trouble where they essentially took away a lot of user data and sold it to different third-party companies who analyzed this data and generated different inferences from it. So essentially, data storing on cloud is also a very crucial aspect. And another different aspect which comes over here is redundancy. So if you store this particular data into one hard drive at your place and suddenly something happens or you drop the hard drive and it fails, so now you have no way of using that data again. But now if you have it stored on a cloud, then essentially it is stored on a lot of different hardware devices. So inside of Google, they use around a 7:1 redundancy ratio. So any data object is stored at 7 different locations. Okay, and again they use a 4:3:2:1 aspect. So a 4:3:2:1 aspect essentially means that at one location you need to have 4 copies of that data stored in 3 different mediums, stored in 2 different locations, and in one form. Okay, so this is the 4:3:2:1 rule which is used in data. Then finally, we come across another very important aspect of using clouds, and that is called cloud computing. Okay, so in cloud computing, essentially you use the compute power available on cloud. So CPU power, GPU power, or graphics power, and all of this power is based on some sort of server situated somewhere, but essentially you use that compute power to create a lot of different workflows. So to create something like a simulation workflow, or to create something like a very complicated program. So so let's take an example of a machine learning program where you are teaching a machine learning program to play a game of Call of Duty. Okay, and now while playing this particular game, now you have to go across 1,000 different paths of playing this same game, and this is very difficult. So playing one single game for one time actually costs us about 30 minutes, but on a cloud you can simulate thousands of different game instances at the same time, and you can train the computer to play on that particular game. So this is how, once you train a model for weeks and months together, it becomes better and better at doing what it essentially is doing, and that is of playing that particular game. Okay, so with this we are done with the introduction for this particular session, and then let's get started with the coding part shortly. But before that, after sharing all of these aspects, now I need you to think that how are exactly companies using cloud. So now take any sort of company in any different domain. Somewhere or the other, they have a different web hosting aspect, or at any given company, they always store some sort of data. So it may be accounts related data, it may be customer related data, it may be any sort of data which is stored in that particular company. then every company needs some processing. So essentially a few years back or a few decades back, this sort of web hosting was essentially newspaper advertisement. Then this sort of data storage was was done in a lot of different books where people used to write the customer data by hand. And this sort of compute was done by employees where they were manually calculating stuff. So now all of this has been moved on a cloud where you have a website which you can create for your own business. Then you have database where you can store your data, and ultimately you can use a cloud to perform calculations on the stored data and then display it to the user. So this is why if you think about any single company which is out there, they use some sort of any one of these aspects. And this is why learning cloud is very, very important, because this revolution has not even started yet. But once the cloud revolution starts, it's not only limited to IT companies, but companies in all different sectors, in various different shape, size, form, everyone will be migrating towards the cloud and moving their own infrastructure to the cloud. So becoming a cloud developer in the 2020 timeline is a very important skill set. And if you can possess at least a small part of this skill set, where you can at least perform some basic aspects like deploying a website, creating a database, or using cloud for some sort of computing, that is when you are capable to a completely different aspect of development. And companies really need a lot of different companies have a lot of different openings where you solve these problems. So essentially I also recommend you to, or I also urge you to think about these things from a company perspective. So honestly, the aspect or the thought process of us is basically that we want an opportunity to get into a company. But think of it in some other ways. There are some things which each and every company needs. So if you become a master of these technologies, or if you become at least well versed with these technologies, that is when you don't need an opportunity. You give an opportunity to that company by hiring you. Okay, so try and reverse the equation. So this is a tagline, like flatten the curve, you can say reverse the equation, and essentially start building up your skill sets in such a way that if anything that you learn is of very crucial importance to someone out there. And right now, cloud is a very important aspect in that entire list of super important and super crucial skill sets. So that is why this entire Google Cloud online course is planned in such a way that you are given the basics of each of these technology.